When does a company's drive to succeed, when does that cross the line and become an actual crime? Well, we're going to get right into that question by breaking down one of the biggest corporate scandals of the last few decades, the shocking case of Wells Fargo's fake accounts.
Okay, so at the very heart of this scandal is a number that it's truly staggering. Over 2 million. I mean, think about that. That's how many bank and credit card accounts were secretly opened by Wells Fargo employees, all of them without the customer ever knowing or giving consent. This wasn't some little glitch in the system. No, this was widespread, systemic fraud.
So to really understand how something like this could even happen, we're basing this whole explainer on a 2017 academic paper. It's great because it gives us a solid legal and ethical framework. It helps us get past the headlines and really see what was going on at the core of this whole breakdown.
All right, here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we're going to look at the sheer scale of the scandal. Then, we'll dissect the anatomy of the fraud, like how they actually did it. After that, we'll dig into the legal and ethical lines they just blew past, figure out the philosophical failures behind it all, and finally, we'll look at the long road to maybe, just maybe, rebuilding trust.
Okay, so first up, a scandal of scale. And believe me, the numbers here tell a story that is way bigger than what you probably saw in the headlines. I mean, the fallout was just immense. It wasn't just the 2 million fake accounts. Get this, over 5,300 employees were fired. And most of them, they were the frontline tellers, the people working in the local branches. The bank got hit with $185 million in initial fines. And yeah, the CEO, John Stumpf, he was forced to resign. But it really makes you wonder, right? Firing thousands of lower-level workers while the execs stick around for a while, were those employees really the problem? Or were they just a symptom of something much, much bigger?
So that brings us to the million-dollar question, right? How did this actually happen? I mean, what was the mechanism that drove thousands of regular employees to start breaking the law? Well, it all started with something that sounds totally normal, a business strategy called cross-selling. And the idea is pretty simple, right? If you've got a customer with a checking account, hey, let's sell them a credit card, or a mortgage, or a car loan. But here's the thing. At Wells Fargo, this simple strategy got warped. It turned into an obsession, a culture built around aggressive, completely unrealistic sales targets.
And the way our source paper describes the work environment, honestly, it's chilling. We're not just talking about pressure. It was, and I'm quoting here, an excruciatingly high pressure inside a boiler room atmosphere. For a lot of these employees, committing fraud started to feel like the only way they could possibly keep their jobs. So to hit these impossible goals, employees had to get creative, in the worst way possible. They started using specific tactics. They'd secretly open new accounts and then just move money out of a customer's real account to fund the fake one. They'd submit credit card applications using customer info, all without permission. They even created fake email addresses to sign people up for online services. And get this, they'd activate PINs on debit cards that customers had no idea even existed. So yeah, obviously this wasn't just bad business practice, this was straight up illegal. So let's dig into the specific legal and ethical lines that were completely trampled here. Creating these fake accounts, it was like opening a legal Pandora's box for the bank. It wasn't just one single offense. It was a whole cascade of violations that exposed them to massive, massive civil liability. We're going to focus on 3 of the big ones. Okay, first up, breach of contract. I mean, think about it. A bank account is a contract. It's a basic agreement. You give them your money, and in return, they agree to keep it safe and only do things with your permission. By opening accounts and moving money around without that permission, Wells Fargo just completely shattered that fundamental agreement with every single one of its customers. Next, you've got negligence. And this one is so important because it points the finger directly at management. The executives, they totally failed to exercise what the law calls reasonable care. They're the ones who created and enforced this insane high-pressure system, a system where fraud wasn't just possible, you could argue it was inevitable. They were absolutely negligent in their duty to supervise their own people and to protect their customers.
And finally, we have the most obvious charge of all, just plain fraud. I mean, this is the intentional deception of a victim for some kind of gain. Every single one of those 2 million fake accounts, that's a textbook case of fraud. It was a purposeful concealment of a huge fact, the existence of the account itself, all done to deceive the customer and, of course, to benefit the bank.
But, breaking the law on this scale, it's really just a symptom of a much deeper problem. So you got to ask, why did this happen on a philosophical level? What kind of ethical frameworks just completely fell apart inside this company?
We can actually look at this epic ethical failure through a couple of major philosophical lenses. So first, let's take a utilitarian view. That's the one that focuses on consequences, the greatest good for the greatest number. Well, from that angle, this was a total disaster. The pain it caused for millions of customers, for the thousands of employees who got fired, for society's trust in banks, it just massively outweighed any tiny bit of pleasure or profit the bank got. But then, if you look at it from a Kantian perspective, which is all about duty, it's even worse. Kantian ethics has this core idea that you can never ever treat people as just a means to an end, and that is exactly what Wells Fargo did. They didn't see customers as people. They saw them as tools, as numbers on a spreadsheet to be used for profit. So, no matter how you slice it, this was a massive, profound ethical failure.
So after a breakdown this total, how does a company even begin to pick up the pieces? What does the roadmap for rebuilding trust even look like?
Well, the paper we're looking at actually lays out a pretty clear 5-step path forward. First thing you got to do, change the incentives. That whole broken system has to go. Sales goals need to be reasonable and actually focused on helping the customer, not just hitting a number. Second, you need full transparency, no excuses. Come clean, apologize for real, and be open with everyone. Third, ethics has to become the new culture, and that has to be modeled from the very, very top. Fourth, you need real accountability with outside independent consultants checking your work. And finally, and this is so key, you have to rebuild trust with your own employees. That means protecting whistleblowers and making ethical behavior the absolute cornerstone of the company.
And all of this, it brings us to one last really critical question to think about. See, the Wells Fargo scandal, it wasn't just about a few bad apples. It was about a whole corporate culture that rewarded results, that celebrated hitting the numbers no matter the cost. So it really leaves us with this. If a company's culture is set up to reward results over integrity, isn't a scandal like this, isn't it pretty much inevitable?